This next story is a political story, but it's also sort of a math story. You know, I love a good math story. And this math story has to do with the fact that a lot of people don't understand percentage versus percentage points. Now, to people who do understand the difference, please accept my sincere apology that I have to do this right now. But the amount of confusion over this over the last 24 hours has forced my hand, and I have to do this. So here's the headline. Donald Trump's approval rating is down 10 points, or you could also say 10 percentage points in the last month. So early in the coronavirus pandemic, Donald Trump's approval actually went up all the way up to 49% in the Gallup tracking poll. It is now down to 39%. So Trump's approval went from 49% to 39%. That's a decline of 10 points. The problem here is that some people don't understand the difference between percent and percentage points. Others understand the concept, but are using the wrong term and just confusing other people. So let's just work through a very quick example. If someone has 50% approval and their approval goes down by 10%, strictly speaking, that would mean 50%, 10% of 50 is 5. That means if you have 50% approval and approval goes down 10%, you go from 50 to 45, okay? 10% of 50 is 5. So far, I think we're clear. If you have an approval of 50% and it drops 10 points, also said 10 percentage points, that's a decline of 10 actual points, meaning you went from 50 to 40. You lost 10 points. 50 minus 10 is 40. The confusion comes when we're talking about percent changes to things already measured in percent. Okay, so in this case, our real world numbers are Trump's approval spiked to 49 and then dropped to 39 in a 1 month period. That's a 10-point decline, but it is about a 20% decline to his approval, right? If you lose 10 out of 49, that's about 20%. And if you're now thoroughly confused, forget everything I've said. The news part of this story is that Trump's approval went from 49 to 39. That's a very rapid decline. In fact, I think it's the largest 1 month decline that Trump has seen at any time during his presidency. Now, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that clearly Donald Trump's approval is not immune from his actions. In other words, the failed coronavirus response, the totalitarian instincts that came to light after the George Floyd killing and the protests that started, this has hurt Donald Trump. That's good. He's not immune. The bad news is that somehow 4 out of 10 Americans still think he's doing a good job. So this may be a good time to remind you that when it comes to presidential approval, when you think about how divided the country is, presidential approval adds up to 100, but there's not really 100 points of approval in play. There's some portion of people who, for ideological reasons, will never approve of the job that the president does. I don't know if that's like, 10%, 15%, 20, I'm not really sure. On the other side, you've got people who will never abandon Trump no matter what he does. That could be 15, 20, 25%. I don't know exactly what it is right now, but the point is Trump's bottom for approval is not 0 and his top for approval is not 100. Even with George W. Bush, when things were less partisan, after 9/11, Bush saw a massive spike in approval to 90 or 88%, something like that. That was probably his ceiling, and those were the absolutely most extenuating circumstances. So the point is, when Trump's approval moves from 49 to 39, 49 to 39, it's in that range. It's really a lot more than that because the bottom is not 0 and the top is not 100. Pick what numbers you think it is. With Trump, it's probably something like, I don't think his approval, no matter what he does, would go below 25 or maybe even 28, something like that. And I don't think it would go higher than probably 80, no matter what he does. So in the context of a range that is more like 28 to 80, a 10-point swing is pretty significant. But there's a lot of people in this country who will never abandon him. It might be for their own self-esteem. They don't want to admit to themselves that they made a mistake when they voted Trump in 2016. And the way to at least trick your brain into thinking you didn't make a mistake is to vote for him again in 2020. There's this quote incorrectly attributed to Mark Twain. It's still a good quote, just not Mark Twain. The quote is, "It's easier to fool people than to convince them that they've been fooled. And along those lines, we have to understand why a lot of 2016 Trump voters are going to vote for him again. Some may abandon him, and there's a very small margin there that Trump can afford to lose before it becomes almost impossible to win re-election. But understand, it's easier to fool people than to convince them they've been fooled, and it is very relevant in the times of Trump. We'll take a quick break and be back with much more right after this. Make sure you're following me on Instagram for the latest urban garden and puppy updates at david.pakman.